Brachos Daf discusses the bracha in various types of foods. The Gemara opens with a discussion related to yesterday's blot about kuba da'ara, a type of bread which is similar to a batter. Then the Gemara discusses fruits that are changed in various ways. The Gemara says, what's the correct bracha on juice? If you juice a fruit, if you grind it up but it's chunky as opposed to pureed. The Gemara wants to know what's the bracha if you're eating a fruit for medicinal purposes. The Gemara takes a detour and discusses the bracha of hamaitzi, what the correct text of the bracha is. And then the Gemara talks about cooked vegetables. Does it lose its bracha by cooking? So the first part of the Gemara begins by discussing 4 different types of foods and what the correct bracha should be for them. The first one to be discussed is kuba da'ara, which is kind of like a bread-like substance, which is made by creating a hollow in the floor of the oven and filling it with water and flour and mixing them. Gemara brings 3 opinions as to what that is. Does it count as bread or not? The Gemara first quotes that Rav Yosef says it's not bread, it's a mezainis. It's just a batter. The Gemara says that Mar Zutra said that it's bread, and he used to make a suda on it, and he made a hamaitzi, and he said Brachos and mazain. And Rav Ashi said you can even use it for Pesach because it's bread, and it counts as matzah because it's lechem oini, it's poor man's bread. The next halacha the Gemara discusses is fruit juices other than grape and olive. Grape and olive, we know, makes wine and oil, so that has a very special bracha status. But what about juices of other fruits? Does that count as fruit, and therefore it should have a bracha bar priya eitz, or does it just count as regular liquid that doesn't really have fruit content, and it would get a bracha shahakal? There are other nafkaminas whether it counts as fruit or not. If it counts as fruit, then if somebody were to eat somebody else's truma juice, he would have to pay an extra chomish, an extra fifth, as a penalty for eating truma. In addition, there's a question: are you allowed to juice truma fruits? Are you allowed to squeeze them for the juice? You'd only be allowed to do that if it was really considered to be fruit in its squeezed, juiced state. So the Gemara says as follows: Ravashi says that the honey of the dates, which is like squeezed from the dates, it gets a bracha shahakol. It doesn't count as actual fruit. It just counts as some kind of liquid. The Gemara says, and that goes like the sheet of Rabbi Shua. We have a machlokes. What is the halacha about if somebody ate juices of truma fruits? Specifically, he ate honey of the dates, or he ate apple juice, or he ate some kind of a vinegar made from leftovers of the grapevine. So if he ate these things, does he have to pay chomish or not? Rabbi Elazar says he has to pay chomish. Rabbi Shua says he does not have to pay chomish. So you see that Rabbi Shua is holding that it does not count as fruit. Now the Gemara moves on to a discussion of trima. Trima is where you ground up some kind of a fruit, and it's still chunky, it's still lumpy, it's not pureed completely into a paste. So what's the halacha of that? So Gemara says that somebody asked this question to Rava, and Rava didn't understand the question. And Ravina was sitting there, and Ravina tried to figure out what the questioner was asking. He said, you made a paste. What was it out of? Was it made out of sesame seeds, and you're trying to get the oil out? Was it made out of karkum spice, and you were planning on mixing it with wine so you could eat it? Or was it made out of grapes, and you were trying to crush up the seeds and the pits and the skin so you could soak it in water to make wine? Like, what was this about? What was this for? So while this whole conversation was happening, Rava was just sitting there, and Rava all of a sudden understood the question. He said, I understand what you're asking. You're asking about grinding it up to make chashilta, some kind of food made with eggs. So Rava said, now I understand your question, and I know the answer, because Ravasi said the following halacha: are you allowed to make ground up food out of truma dates? So the halacha is you're allowed to grind it up to make that food out of it, but you're not allowed to make the dates into beer, because beer is not a proper use of truma food. It's not what it's designed for. But to grind it up and make it into a chunky kind of paste, that you're allowed to do. So you see that the halacha is that this paste does count as fruit, and therefore the bracha is ha'etz. And the Gemara says, and that's the halacha, and the reason is because it still maintains its former state. It's still in the former fruit state. It's not squeezed completely into a liquid. It still has the chunky aspect of the fruit. to it. Now the Gemara discusses something called shasisa. This is the fourth shaila here. Shasisa is a food that's made out of roasted kernels that are ground into flour and then mixed with some food with honey or with oil. The Gemara wants to know what's the status of this. So the Gemara says it's a machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Rav says shahakal, Shmuel says it's a mezainis. Rav says it's not a machlokes. They're talking about different types of mixtures. Rav said it's a shahakal. He's talking about where you made it in a loose mixture, and a loose mixture it's not really meant to be eaten, it's meant to swallow as some kind of refuah, some sort of medicinal treatment. And Shmuel said that it's a mezainis, he's referring to where's the thick mixture, and then it's a food. The Gemara asks, how could it be that? One of the opinions here was that it's referring to when it's a medicinal mixture. How could that be? But in this very discussion, we have in Masechta Shabbos where it says that you're allowed to make this on Shabbos and allowed to swallow it. You're not allowed to take medicine on Shabbos. It's an Isser. You're Rabbanan. So Gemara says, well, hold on a second. You want to say you're not allowed to take this thing on Shabbos, but we have a Mishnah that says explicitly that you're allowed to eat and drink food for medicinal purposes on Shabbos. How are you going to understand that? How are you allowed to do that? I thought you're not allowed to take medicine on Shabbos. Oh, the answer is that if it's food, you're allowed to take it even if it has medicinal qualities on Shabbos, as long as what you're doing is eating it for food. So we're discussing the same thing here. When Rav said it's a shahakal and he was referring to a loose mixture, he's referring to somebody who is eating it for food. He did not intend for its refuah qualities, but it does have refuah as well, and it is primarily a refuah object, and therefore its bracha is properly shahakal. Now the Gemara says, I still need this statement of Rav to tell me that you make a bracha on it. The fact that I learned in Shabbos that you're allowed to take it on Shabbos, which identifies it as it must be food, because you're not allowed to take something which is not edible just for medicine on Shabbos. So the fact that I see that you're allowed to take this thing and that it counts as food, that doesn't tell me that you necessarily say a bracha on it in a case where somebody is only eating it for medicine. That's what Rav comes to tell me. Not only is it true that it counts as food and you could eat it on Shabbos if that's what you have in mind, but even if you're taking it just for medicine during the week, you would still have to make a bracha on it, and the bracha would be shahakal because you do get some hana quality out of it. The Gemara now discusses the halacha of the bracha of hamaitzi lechem min haaretz. We quote from the Mishnah that says on bread you say hamaitzi lechem min haaretz. The Gemara asks, what is the correct text of the bracha exactly? Is it maitzi lechem or ha-maitzi lechem? What's the issue? We want to phrase it in a way that the words mean that Hashem has already taken bread from the ground, because you're eating the bread now, you're holding it in your hand, it's been taken from the ground a while ago. The question is as follows. Everybody agrees that the phrase maitzi lechem min haaretz without a hey means it was taken already. It could mean that it was already taken from it before. How do you know? Because when in Parshas Balak we have the phrase kel maitzi am mi Mitzrayim, God who has taken them out of Mitzrayim. So maitzi am without a hey means taken already. So we see that the phrase maitzi or maitzi means taken already. So that works for sure, that everybody agrees to. However, could you say ha-maitzi? It's a machlokes between the Rabbanon and Rabbi Nechemiah. What's the machlokes? On one hand, you have a pasuk that says ha-maitzi locha mayim mitzor chalamish. Moshe told Klai Yisrael in the Midbar that Hashem has taken out water for you from a rock. So that seems to imply that it's past tense, even though even ha-maitzi with a hey is past tense, and you could use it for the bracha of ha-maitzi lechem min haaretz. Rabbi Nechemiah says, but you find contradictory. You find when HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling Moshe that he's going to take Klai Yisrael out of Mitzrayim, he says, v'yidatem ki ani Hashem lekechem ha-maitzi eschem mitachal civilized Mitzrayim. And he hadn't taken anybody out yet. So you see, it means future. You can't say a bracha ha-maitzi lechem min haaretz that he will take bread out of the ground. What does that have to do with what you're eating now? The Gemara says, okay, so what do the Rabbanan do with that? How do the Rabbanan say that you are allowed to say that? So the Gemara says, the Rabbanan understand the pasuk as follows. Hashem is telling Moshe, when you'll get out of here, and you'll be past this whole thing, you'll look back, and you will know that I was Hashem who took you out. So we're telling you something's going to happen in the future. You're going to look back and say past tense, v'yadatem, you will know then, that I am Hashem who has taken you out of the hardship of Mitzrayim. Okay, what's the halacha l'maisa? The Gemara quotes an incident. They told Rabbi Zera that somebody, Shimon bar Rav Zvid, or his brother was very well versed in the halachos of brachos and their proper exact text. So he wanted to find it for himself. So he said, when he comes to town, please have him come visit me. So he came, and he gave him some bread to eat. So he watched the bracha, and he said, Maitzi. He said, Maitzi lechem menorah. Didn't say ha Maitzi. So he said, this is the person that you're telling me is so great in halachos brachos, the exact text. Everybody holds you could say Maitzi. That's not a big deal. I figured he would tell me how Maitzi, then that would be a chiddush. He would tell me that the halacha is like the Rabbanon, and he would tell me that the proper way of understanding the psukim is like the Rabbanon. That would be something. This is nothing. So Gemara says, no, the reason why he didn't want to say ha Maitzi is because he didn't want to get involved in the machlekes. He'd rather go with the safer approach. Maitzi, it works according to all opinions. But the Gemara does paskin, halacha l'maisa, we say ha Maitzi. Halacha is like the Rabbanon, and we say ha Maitzi lechem min haaretz. Now the Gemara returns to the Mishnah and quotes the line in the Mishnah that said that the correct bracha on vegetables is bari priya adama. The Gemara is going to get into, what about vegetables that were cooked? Do they retain the status of vegetables and the bracha stays hadama, or they lose the status of vegetables and the bracha drops to a shahakal? Now the Gemara is going to note that there were other nafkaminas, whether something that is cooked loses its status as its original object. If you cook matzah, could you still use it for matzah? If you cook maror, could you still use it for maror? If it changes from its original status, then you couldn't use it for these things anymore. So the Gemara begins by noting that the Mishnah puts vegetables next to bread, just like bread is something which was changed in fire, you baked it. So vegetables that were changed in fire, meaning that you cooked it, should also be a bari priya adama. That's a statement and observation of Rav Noi in the name of Abaye. Now the Gemara quotes two versions of a machlokes. We have the Rav Chizda version and the Rav Nachman version. And the Gemara first discusses the Rav Chizda version. Rav Chizda says it's a machlokes between Rav and Ula in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, who came from Eretz Yisrael, about whether cooked vegetables are a shahakal or a hadama. And Rav Chizda says, and I say, that there's no machlokes. One says shahakal, one says hadama, because they're talking about different situations. Really, the halacha that they both agree to is as follows. If something is in its primary state, it's hadama. If it's in a non-primary state, it's a shahakal. So, if you have a vegetable that's meant to be eaten raw, and you cook it, so it's a shahakal now. It started out as a hadama in its raw state, because that's how it's meant to be eaten, and then you cooked it, you made it from a hadama to a shahakal. On the other hand, if you have something that's meant to be eaten cooked, were you to eat it raw, it would start out as a shahakal. It's a shahakal in its first raw state. When you cook it, then it's transformed to the way it was meant to be consumed, then it gets its proper bracha of hadama. So the two shitos here, Rav and Ula, in the name of Rav Yochanan, aren't really arguing. They're talking about a vegetable which is cooked, and one is referring to one that's meant to be eaten cooked, so it's hadama, and the other is referring to one which is meant to be eaten raw, and therefore it's a shahakal in its cooked state. Now the Gemara wants examples of each. What's a vegetable that is meant to be eaten cooked, and if you eat it raw, it's a shahakal? So the Gemara says that's cabbage and spinach and pumpkin. And what's an example of something which is meant to be eaten raw, and if you cook it, it's a shahakal? The Gemara says garlics and karti, which is defined as a type of bean, cretion. So that's Rav Chizda's version. Now, Rav Nachman's version is that it wasn't a machlokes between Rav and Ula and Rav Yochanan. It was a machlokes between Shmuel and Ula in the name of Rav Yochanan. Again, who came from Eretz Yisrael. And the machlokes is the same. One said that cooked vegetables is a shahakal, one said that it's a hadama. But Rav Nachman's addition was not that they agree, but that they argue. It's true that they argue, and they argue in a machlokes, an existing machlokes tanoim. Machlokes are Meir and Rav Yosi. What's the halacha if somebody wants to eat cooked matzah for Pesach? Rabbi Meir says you could be ate with cooked matzah. Rabbi Yosi says you cannot. So that's the same machlokes. Just like matzah is a machlokes whether it retains the halacha of matzah even after it's cooked, the machlokes is if vegetables retain the status of a vegetable and keep its bracha, or it loses its bracha when it's cooked. So the Gemara says that's not true, because Rabbi Yossi, who says that you can't use cooked matzah, that's because you need to taste matzah. It's not because it loses the status of matzah. It is matzah, it just doesn't taste like matzah. And there's a halacha that Pesach matzah has to taste like matzah. Now the Gemara quotes machlokes between two more of Rabbi Yochanan's Talmidim as to what he actually said. We saw what Ula said in his name. The Gemara says Rabbi Chia bar Abba said in his name that cooked vegetables is a bar priyadama, but Rabbi Yamin bar Yefes said in his name that cooked vegetables is a shahakal. So the Gemara says that Rav Nachman said that it was Ula quoting Rabbi Yochanan, and that Ula made a mistake. He took on Rav Binyamin bar Yefes's understanding, but it was a mistake. He understood that it was a mistake, but then the mistake crept in, and he began to remember it as that mistake was what Rabbi Yochanan really said. But the truth is that he didn't really say it like that. The Gemara goes further, and the Gemara says that Rav Zera said that he can't understand how Rabbi Binyamin bar Yefes has the chutzpah to argue on Rabbi Chia bar Abba as to what Rabbi Yochanan said. And he brings 3 or 4 reasons why you shouldn't be able to argue on him. Number 1, Rabbi Chia bar Abba was very careful in every exact word that Rabbi Yochanan said, and Rabbi Yamin bar Yefes was not so much careful in everything that he said. Next thing he says is Rabbi Chia bar Abba chazered over everything he learned from Rabbi Yochanan in front of Rabbi Yochanan every 30 days. He went through everything he learned. Rabbi Yamin bar Yefes never did that. So how could Rabbi Yamin bar Yefes argue with him as to what Rabbi Yochanan actually said? And the Gemara says, in addition, I could bring you another proof that Rabbi Chia bar Abba is right. Because you have the case of a tormus. A tormus is a type of bean which has to be cooked very long. And so there was a tormus plate that was cooked 7 times. And it's eaten for dessert. So they went and asked Rabbi Yochanan what the bracha is, and he said, Bari Priyadama. So you see that Rabbi Chia bar Abba is right. Clearly the bracha is Bari Priyadama. Then the Gemara says further that Rabbi Chia bar Abba said that I once saw Rabbi Yochanan himself. I saw him eat a pickled olive, and he said a bracha before it and a bracha after it. So the Gemara says now a pickled olive, it's soaked in salt water. That's the same as cooking. We have a rule in halacha that pickling accomplishes the same change to an item as cooking it does. Now, if Rabbi Yochanan said a bracha before it and a bracha afterwards, that would have to be a eitz and a al ha'etz. What other bracha could he say afterwards? There is no other bracha afterwards. So obviously it's a ha'etz afterwards. If it's an al ha'etz afterwards, then it's a ha'etz before. Therefore, you see that a pickled olive, and by extension a cooked olive, should retain its bracha, and it doesn't lose the status, just like Rabbi Chia bar Abba said. Gemara says not so fast. It could be that the bracha afterwards was a bar nefashos. Maybe he said a shahakal before, and he said a bar nefashos afterwards. The Gemara now attempts to prove that the bracha on cooked vegetables should really be a shahakal, not like we've been saying. The Gemara says Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel said, there's a halacha that we've seen in a brisa, you can't use cooked maror by the Seder. Why not? It must be the reason is because it loses the status of a maror vegetable. So again, the Gemara rejects this for a similar reason as before. It could be that it is still a vegetable and it would still be a hadam, but you can't use it for a maror because you need the taste of a maror to be able to do the mitzvah of maror properly at the Seder.